I'm back. We're not back yet. I'm back from vacation. Adrian decided to extend slightly, but you're here. I'm here. If nothing else, this is for me, and this is a little bit of practice for me to get back in the groove of streaming because we had quite a little bit of downtime during what we can now safely call summer vacation. It was great, I have to tell you, to take some time off and spend some time with the family. Went to the beach, to the seaside. Yeah, so I'm back, quite energized, feeling quite fresh, and I figured today we would hang on, banner. I figured today we would talk about testing. I've been had a lot of coaching conversations lately, and I decided to make today's agenda about the common objections, let's say, or types of resistance when it comes to testing, which is usually you want to test and your team doesn't want to test. You want to test, but you feel like you need permission from your manager because the budget doesn't make sense because you have to be on a tight deadline. Or you're the manager and you would like your team to test, but they're never testing and you're not quite sure why. These are all the same problem from different perspectives. And I figured I would host a session with you today to help you navigate this. This is one of the things I coach people how to navigate: leaders, engineers, seniors, juniors. Sometimes it's from the perspective of a junior looking for a new job and they want to vet the company that they're doing this. Sometimes it's a disgruntled employee who just is sick and tired of the no testing culture. And sometimes usually it's a technical leader or an engineering manager or a director who inherited a team with or legacy code with bad engineering practices, and they have to make like a sharp course correction to radically improve quality in the code base. Usually stuck, endless loop of stuck with support tickets, stuck with QA, stuck with like slow delivery, or just stuck on endless meetings about triaging. Should we rewrite? Should we not rewrite? We need to modernize something. Somebody's consultants are selling us Strangler Fig and rewrites in Go and Rust, and we can barely operate this old system, right? So that's the main agenda for today: how to deal with that situation. If you find yourself in that situation, do let me know. If the comments are working, give me a 1 in chat. A fun icebreaker is to tell me what country you're from. So how's it going? Is it as hot as here in Ljubljana? We got like 34, 35 degrees heat wave. My air conditioning is not working. You can probably see my shiny forehead. Oh. How are you doing? I missed you, by the way, in case that wasn't obvious. I do miss these streams. Sometimes they get a little bit too much logistically, but it's great to have this kind of direct connection to the community. USA, Ryan. Hey, how's it going? I remember you from being very vocal with our sessions with Brian Finster. Great to have you, Ryan. Brian spoke very highly of you. 1 in chat and USA. Overachiever. Brian, how are you regarding testing? Like, is there any team misbehaving? Is this your main area of focus when it comes to cultural change and adoption? What did you struggle with the most? Or is it picturesque perfect where you're at? If that's the case, we should chat because we can probably learn something from you. Okay. I just want to honor the agenda, so I'm going to open up the exact written form. And let's talk about the core details. Cool. Okay, so these are the main areas. Oh, Scalidraw had an update. Cool. Present. Share screen. Scalidraw. No audio. Yeah, you don't want to echo. window. Which one? This one. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is the agenda. How to test while working. How to scope testing correctly. Usually it means somebody wants you to test and it will come at a cost of something. I test when my team doesn't. I would test if I had more time, and we're swamped, and my manager will kill me if I mention investing time into tests. These are coming directly from my coaching practice. These are the main objections that I have to deal with every day. Or rather, these are the objections that my clients have to deal with every day, and then I help them sort of navigate it. So I've navigated this path quite a few times, and I figured, why not share this with you? Maybe it'll help. If it helps, happy to help. Ryan says he's passionate about testing, not doing things ideal over here. Yeah, we've got separate QA that have to sign off on our stuff in terms of heavy-handed process. So do they have to sign off on whether the features are implemented correctly or whether your test coverage is high enough, right? So are they signing off on the quality of the product, or are they signing off on the quality of the testing process, or an overlap? Because I do see this quite often. I do see this come up in the shape of the QA team is testing regression on the product and also telling us how high coverage needs to be, or that each feature that is impactful has to have coverage for future regressions based on the current either requirements or acceptance criteria, whether that's even clear. Happy to hear more from your experience, Ryan. So I just want to highlight, wait, how's font size? Is this better? Let's make it this one. Excali font. Ooh. Oh, there was an update. Cool. Oh, I like that. I had a plugin for that, and now we don't need it anymore. Okay. We don't need this. So testing scope is an interesting conversation. Usually when teams come to me, I have to say, everybody who complains, it's usually a chicken egg problem. You want permission, the manager won't give you permission. The manager doesn't know why you're asking for permission. They expect quality, but they're also expecting you to be on time and to meet the deadline. So it's the chicken egg problem of like both ends of the conversation suffocating each other into stalemate, essentially. Like they want more, but they won't give you more time, right? So it's a really stressful feeling. It's quite uncomfortable. Your QA department end tests your product supposedly, and we're supposed to write automated tests for us, but they can never really keep up with the devs. So I'm assuming they don't quite know how to. The translation between some end-to-end test failing and then linking it back to causality to which unit tests should be failing instead is not quite clear, right? So that is then the main issue with QA. That is ironically quite a common problem when there's so my team write our own tests, and then QA asks us what they should test, which just feels redundant. Yeah, I agree. But they probably own the end-to-end test stack, right? So end-to-end testing is actually a partially manual, at least for regression, it's a partially manual procedure, right? So they own that, and they don't. It's a lot of labor-intensive work, and they want to do that. So they want you to tell them how to do that. Many of the other teams just throw work over the wall at QA. Yeah, I've seen that a lot of times. We'll get to that, Brian. Right now, I just want to highlight the budgeting problem first. Or actually, I'm going to connect my budgeting insights with your problem. How's that? So the budgeting insights are usually an engineer will think, this is the budget for features. I made it blue. Let's make it blue. This is the budget for features and without tests. And then they say, hey, management, if you want tests, it'll cost extra. right? So let's say this line. Let's assume this line is 90% of the budget, right? So there's a ceiling. There's like a certain cost to your salaries, and most of your salaries are going into this. And if you want tests, it costs extra, which means I work overtime and we need to move the deadline, right? Because you can't pay me more to move twice as fast. If you have to pay me more by budgeting more finances, it means I need to have a part of a project where I'm building features, and I need to have a part of a project where I'm not building features, which means we need to move the deadline or move the scope. And then you have QA, and then they don't want to play along, and you say, actually, if you want QA, it also costs extra. This is QA. This is Ryan's problem. And then if there's regressions and bug fixes, guess what? That also costs extra. So we call this bug fix, or if we have a contract for it, we call this maintenance and support. But really, it's just bullshit, because now you just made feature development twice as expensive, right? And if you give me the choice of it can cost 10K and I get what I want, or it costs 20K and I get what I want, but it's of higher quality, I'm like, wait, can I see what I get for 10K first, and then we can negotiate on the scope of tests? The problem is this thing is then followed by another set, so this thing actually never happens, because it just keeps going right on this area, because your backlog is more of these things, and very rarely, like if your backlog had these things in the backlog, that would actually be quite a serious dysfunction. This is the perspective from, if I talk to 10 developers, 9 of them have this opinion. Usually the most senior person has the inverse opinion. So what I do with the team is generally telling them, this thing here is a too large step. You're building too many features, or building one feature and over engineering it without tests, right? So the step which you take without building any tests, in Ryan's case, without building the end test and end-to-end testing it, is too large before the testing conversation happens. So if I had, let's say, this is the dysfunctional team. This is dysfunction, and this is the, let's say, high-performing team. What the high-performing team says is, oh, there's no yellow. I would like yellow. What's yellow? Yellow is red and blue, right? FF. No. That's purple. Green. Help. No, wait. It's shading it. This is whatever. Okay. Green. Green it is. Sorry. Wait. Yellow is blue and green. Yeah, yellow is green and blue. Okay, got it. Next time. What a high performing team would do, and where I'm putting it on the chart is probably giving you a hint. What a high performing team does is basically says, look, this is our budget. So whatever we build, our level of quality, our standard essentially has to fit into the feature budget. And the transition, that we do usually during coaching is they tell me, Dennis, that's nice, but we can't. Like, we need to keep this many features. And usually what I would do is I would ask them, why not? And usually the coaching path is then going deeper into this conversation of, why is this not possible? Because ideally, then what we do is they think it's going to be expensive, but it's not expensive. This testing, the size of the tests is a function of the size of the features. If you make the features smaller, well, guess what? The tests also become smaller. And then QA becomes smaller. And becomes smaller as well. BNS. The thing you're annoyed about. By the way, this is the annoying bit. The annoying bit also gets smaller. And this is to scale, right? Like the rate to which you'll need to waste time on bug fixes and maintenance is also scaling down proportionally to how small the increment of change is. Which means if you deliver the same amount of features in total in smaller steps. So if I split this in half and I say 2 of these are 1 of these, and you test them, then in comparison, this one will have much less support, right? So the support size will not scale to the same degree. That's the whole point with testing. That's what quality means, right? So instead of I'm spending the support budget by building the feature in a smaller step so that I can get away with having a test budget. Even if you break even, that's a win. That's the whole point. That's what we want to get to. So if you tell me you don't have the budget, well, it's because you're spending most of your budget building features. So it has to come inward, not outward, right? The budget for engineering is the budget for engineering. You can't ask for more time to go to factor stuff because the extra time that is available that can push out features is usually this, not these two. These, so the quality, these, wait, we have comments. Yes, Ryan says, yes, often manual, right? So there is some process of QA that is manual. Manual testing is worse than automated testing. And if they don't know what they're testing and they require you to tell them what to test, guess what? You, the developers, are writing the end-to-end test by proxy and with a delay. What is the solution? Make the feature increment so small that it doesn't have to be end-to-end test covered, that it could be component test covered if it's front-end related. We had a great episode with that with Nick Shumeko. And we also had then a follow-up episode about what the different types of tests, from backend component tests, backend integration tests, front-end component tests, smoke tests, contract tests, developer tests, etc. Two great, like it's probably 5 hours of like really high-level testing content in our archive. You can check them out on YouTube. It's very easy to find. Kaloyan says, if you spend enough time in the software engineering industry, you've probably seen how the case is outlined within this. Hey, Kaloyan, it's good to see you. Also heads up, today's stream will be slightly shorter. I don't want to have like a 2-hour stream without Adrian being present. And even with Adrian present, we try to keep it down to like 90 minutes. So 1 hour of content and like 30 minutes of like wrapping up and comments. We want to, especially during summer when it gets really sweaty and tiring, we want to keep it down. So we can give it bite-sized to you as well. So it's also easier to rewatch. Ryan, a great question. What do you mean by a testing budget? Do people really separate in their mind the budget for dev and the budget for testing? Well, in my experience, the people who don't test, you don't have a testing budget, Ryan. You just test. The people who don't test, the teams that don't test, they usually think separately of, well, I don't test because testing was not explicitly asked for. That's what I call a testing budget. Now, I'm talking about it in this concept of budget because the customer, the client, will never explicitly ask for it, right? So I never, for example, when I ask painters to paint my walls, I never explicitly ask them to clean up. Like I never set a cleanup budget. But I expect them to clean up. I expect everything to be clean after they're done. Now, in order for that to make sense, they need to budget in time for cleanup, which means the time they spent planning cleanup, they can't spend time painting the wall. And if they did spend time painting the wall, then the entire project will take longer. So when I'm talking about a testing budget, I'm talking about engineers who have a fence and they are thinking about features and testing on being on different sides of the fence. Usually when you don't have a testing budget anymore, I'm talking about the engineering teams who think that these are the same activity. So it will be unfair to actually call it this kind of testing budget. I would actually call it more like this. The testing is just a natural consequence of building features. But writing, and if you're doing 3D, the tests are actually what drive you to write the features. You mean like budgeting their time against themselves? Yes. So it's about budgeting their time about, imagine you're budgeting time on meetings versus feature development. Imagine that you now have to explicitly plan how much time am I spending testing? How much time am I spending refactoring? A team, okay, yeah, it makes sense. Glad I cleared it up. But thanks for asking it. I'm, sometimes I waffle on, and I'm not quite self-aware enough to understand which parts of my explanation are not clear. So cheers for speaking up. I really appreciate you for that level of candor. So when I'm talking about these functions, I talk about teams who don't test because they expect a stakeholder, a manager, to explicitly give them permission being a budget for testing. I see this a lot in agencies where, they might take CI/CD pipelines for granted, but not improving the CI/CD pipeline, not replacing the CI/CD pipeline. So there is no budget for experimentation, right? So you might even see this internally if you are writing tests, because you might not feel that you have the permission to run experiments on maybe replacing a library with another library. These experiments are usually called initiatives. Usually they're being conducted by staff engineers in larger organizations because they feel like they don't need to ask for permission anymore. They just do it when they see the value. So usually, this kind of budgeting problem, it is a problem of dysfunction, right? So it is a symptom of the dysfunction. Usually, this kind of test budgeting beyond our means is a symptom of a cultural dysfunction where the team doesn't see the value in testing, so they expect somebody to allocate time for testing, right? So they expect stakeholders to say, we value testing just as much as you do, so we will allocate time for that. But that can only happen in a team where the engineers don't value testing. That has been my observation. And it took me a long time to come to this realization. Right? Because a team that values testing doesn't ask for permission. By contrast, they basically test within the feature budget. Again, I use this term feature budget to say what you would normally expect time-wise and salary-wise, salary-wise, how many people were involved, how long, in building a feature. Now, a high-performing team, if they spend time writing tests, the time they spend writing the feature and the tests will usually be smaller than the dysfunctional team's time spent building the feature and doing QA and doing maintenance. That's the key idea, right? But you need the entire time horizon. So you need to know how long it takes to build, regression, or not just regression, but also failure has to be automated, which means that you have acceptance criteria, and when I deploy the feature, I need to have some kind of automated mechanism to check whether it performs according to specified characteristics, whether it performs according to specifications. The dysfunctional teams usually don't have this. So they don't actually have the data to compare themselves to a high-performing team. And that is usually the main problem. If you ask them, do you want to improve? They usually think they're already doing their best because they don't have data to compare themselves to this team to actually come to a realization that, oh, actually, the time we spent on bug fixes and building the features, most of the time was actually not necessary. Most of that time was actually waste. most of the time batching together feature development was actually wasted because we spent way too much time not gathering feedback, not testing, and then the increment of change was so large that then we have to explain to QA what this is and how to test it, and it's too much to test, so we need to triage for them, right? So to end-to-end test everything is super expensive, so we should triage, as in Ryan's example, the development team that needs to test, need to teach QA which parts of the product are worth end-to-end testing, because there's so much that can go wrong and it's so expensive to end-to-end test cover it. So that's the first part. If you want to overcome this, focus on asking why. Why not? Why can we not test within the time that is allocated to build the feature? Obviously, that will push scope away, but that is a much better alternative than delivering scope that might have no value and then just get bogged down with maintenance hell 2 weeks later, right? But you need to look at it from the entire timeline. You need to understand the total cost of what it means to deliver software. You need to understand that most code that you deliver is a liability. And delivering more code with more features is not a virtue. It is actually a wasteful activity. There's this great article that I'm curating now for Growth CTO for this week called Elite Performance is Wasted on Feature Factories. And there's this great quote that says, wait, I can open it up, right? You guys can see this? Yeah. There's this great post that says, feature work, if a feature-driven team could deliver features faster than the ideas arrive, they would simply produce features for each demand. The software would do practically anything and would have some mechanism that allows each user to configure the software to work in the way they want. But that means that you're overproducing how many configurations your software can have, right? So you're overproducing into the useless configurations to allow for the useless configurations as well. He says that the whole point of the elite metrics, the low performing, mid performing, high performing, and elite, if you read the Dora report, the whole point of elite performance is not to deliver fast and build a lot of features. It's to be able to run experiments really fast, and for every experiment that has caused an outage, to recover very fast from it, right? So instead of building features and then doing QA, what you're doing is actually building features so quickly that you can test them extremely rapidly, so the time it takes for you to detect that the feature was not implemented correctly was so fast and so rapid that you immediately fixed it, which is this screen on the right. Right? So it basically means that you're delivering them so fast that the cost of getting the experiment wrong, so each implemented feature, each little section here in the features is an experiment. You don't know which code, which feature, which functionality will be the most valuable to the user. Most features that you put into your system are not going to be used. But you don't know which ones are not going to be used unless you put all of them into your system, right? So the point is that you put them into your system and you check them for value. And getting it wrong is so fast to recover from that you can then build more, course correct faster, sooner, and build a different feature instead. And the things that you did get wrong are test covered, and the things that you do get right already rely on the lesson, on the thing you got wrong, and build upon it so that you actually extend it on a test-covered surface area, rather than just blinding features and throwing features at the wall. And then when you say you're done, you're sort of throwing it over the wall to QA, as Ryan mentioned. Ryan says, this is why it's important you don't call the thing done until all the steps are done. Exactly. Many people call the ticket done when development is done, and the rest of the work on the QA. and then bug fix maintenance and support is swept under the rug. Exactly. And then developers get this. Developers, not engineering managers, not leadership, not CTO. The developers. The developers, when they only look at this box, they said, "Oh, I'm really efficient because I spent most of my time that I had allocated building features. So I'm really efficient. 100% of my time was spent building the features, which means I built a lot of features, which by contrast means that every feature that I built was extremely cheap compared to the alternative of having spent more time building the features." That is not actually the case. Because yes, you are testing them, you are building the feature, and then you're testing that it is working, but you're not testing for the important behavior, which is validating the feature for value to the customer. Right? Because what we should be focusing on is value to the customer, not that the software is working. The software working is a very low standard. You want to make sure that you're delivering fast to the customer to really early on. Imagine this is 10 features. Imagine this is 10 features. This is 10 features. You badge them together and then you deliver it to the customer. Now the customer is overwhelmed, and the customer might only validate one feature for value, and they say it's not valuable. But now you don't know what the value of the entire batch is. So the point of testing them in smaller increments is that you build a feature, you test it, whether the software is working, and then you also write tests that confirm your hypothesis for why we think the user will find this valuable. And if we get this part, the value part, wrong, we iterate on it really quickly before we start working on the next feature. And that is what builds quality into the system. With this batched procedure, this was not available, because by the time the customer tells you it's not valuable, you might already be working on the next batch, and you also don't know what the lack of value is related to in this large batch, because you basically lost. The map is too large, the room is too large, right? You deliver a movie to someone and they say they don't like it, and the movie is 40 hours long, and then you ask them, well, what did you not like it? It's too long. That scene at the beginning, I didn't like it. Never mind that it was 40 hours long, right? So you'll get negative feedback early on. You spend all that time editing the movie, and then the first scene being bad basically derails the entire movie, and then nobody watches it. This is also happening on YouTube, by the way. If you're doing YouTube shorts, YouTube videos, the video is usually not worth recording if the thumbnail is going to be weak, because the thumbnail decides how many people will watch the video, not the content itself. So if you're not testing the thumbnail for value, then when you record the video might be great, but nobody will see it. So then if you ask the people who have seen it, how did you find the video? Well, the audience is so small that now you can't have a conversation with all those people that could have used your content but didn't get to it because the thumbnail was weak, or because the headline was weak, or because the keywords were weak. Same thing applies in software. If your software is too large and you're not focusing on the really important stuff, which is how does it impact the user, which is essentially the thumbnail, the first few seconds, and the title. Imagine every feature has that. And if you don't deliver that when it's minimally functional and test it for value, then if you batch 40 videos together in a playlist and you give it to the user, you don't really get any feedback on any of the code that you did. Or think about it this way. You'll get the same amount of feedback for every delivery. If your deliveries are very large, the feedback to code ratio is very much low. It's very much skewed to this area of the feedback will relate to a few key features, but the batch contained 20 features, and now you don't know whether they're useful or not, because the team the users, the customers might have simply glossed over them because there was a more glaring defect preventing them from enjoying using the features that you've developed, that you spent so much time developing. This is the case in large enterprises that are just bogged down by sheer scale, and also in feature factory startups or scale-ups that ended up parallelizing way too much work, which these two categories are usually my ideal clients. So that's one aspect. Then the other aspect that we said we would tackle is this idea of how to test while working within your deadlines and budget. So with testing, usually with deadlines and budget, if it's really harsh, if the deadline almost feels impossible, there's going to be a heroic, this sort of toxic culture of, yeah, I'll just push overtime and maybe we'll do it, right? So there's the standard, and ideally you would get all of your work done to the level of testing quality within your standard. And if that's not possible, these projects usually look like this. Deployment is here, and then the team crashes. This sucks. This kind of team sucks. It sucks being on this kind of team. It sucks being this kind of team CEO. It sucks being this kind of team CTO, because this is, very prevalent in the gaming industry, which is why, very few engineers enjoy being in the gaming industry. So in order to survive in such an environment, you need to have like a really, really ulterior mission, like an ulterior objective that justifies the sacrifice, that justifies this toxicity. I wouldn't recommend it. If you're in such an environment, I would encourage you, if you have some kind of risk in the project, to do it the other way around. If you're gonna do a risk, any kind of risk, do the risk early in a sport, in a short spurt, and then do another risk, another heroic in a short spurt, and then let it normalize. This would be my recommendation, right? So if you're about to tackle such a project and you want to cram as much functionality as possible, and then towards the deadline there will be overtime, well, when you're building most of your code during overtime, that is when you test the least. So if you're in such a project and you know it's going to happen, spend the beginning of the project doing a heroic, maybe spending some overtime to like boost up the quality of the baseline quality of the project. Maybe invest more time in the CI/CD pipeline. Maybe invest more time in cutting scope early. Maybe invest more time in trying to implement the most risky and sort of confusing bit of the feature that you're building, especially if it's user facing, and try to test cover it, right? So try to test cover the really nasty bits of your software early on in the project, even if it means doing a heroic, because it'll then pay dividends across the entire remaining timeline, and that budget will exceed this sort of extra little bit of spike at the beginning. Plus, you'll be able to cover and then calmly go through the deadline. This would be my recommendation. It's very unintuitive, right? So it's still, it doesn't solve the toxicity problem, but it's a lesser evil. Like you have two bad, risky choices. This is the least bad and less risky choice, because you're taking on the risk and the tiredness early on when the team has more energy, and then you allow them to sort of recover by virtue of having tackled something really complex and test covering it. And then they get to be calmer on a longer time horizon throughout the project. Generally, this is anything to do with payments. In insurance tech, this is the really nasty bit that everybody's afraid of doing, which if you don't tackle it explicitly, it'll end up at the end of the project. You've probably seen that. I don't have to tell you this. If you have more than 5 years of experience in the industry, you've probably seen this. What this is a symptom of is that the tech lead or the CTO or the director or whoever is running the major milestones of the project, they don't have a release plan. And when you don't have a release plan, the features are being built by complexity, left to right, by increasing complexity, which means that the really nasty stuff, the really risky stuff, and usually the facing stuff, is built towards the end of the project right? So this would be stuff like Docker, this would be containerization, deployment scripts, and then there's like the entities and the ORM stuff. And this is the nasty domain logic and UI. This is what benefits from testing the most. So if you have this symptom, sit down with someone, get a coach. I volunteer. And then what I will help you or your tech lead do is I will help you how to move this early on into the project, how to cut it up into smaller pieces, and then we will consciously sacrifice something unimportant from the less important stuff to get these babies test covered, to get tests into the nasty bits of the project early on in the timeline, so that you have proof of value and proof of working software the team can rely on sooner in your project. And then you can go balls to the walls and do whatever it is you do. But I can guarantee you that if you do this first and you reorder and you actually have a release plan that gives you an alternative, because building it like this left to right is very cumbersome, because the most important stuff gets built 2 weeks before the deadline. If you have a release plan and you're actually moving the risky bits and the more confusing bits early on into the project, I can guarantee you that everybody will be much calmer throughout the remaining budget, time, whatever, maybe there's someone going on vacation midway through the project or towards the beginning of the project, or maybe you'll hire someone and they'll be onboarded right at week 3 of like a 2-month project. I can guarantee you, if you tackle the hard stuff, you have the discipline and the initiative and the courage to tackle the hard stuff earlier into the project, it will encourage you to set a higher quality standard, which will then calm everybody down, and you will go from this kind of mentality to this kind of mentality, right? So even if we do this early on and then you go back to this, no problem, right? This is what I always tell them. Go for the easy win. This is already a win. We don't have to go on the entire budget. Just improve the workflow on one key feature, and then you can go back to your default if you want. You'll have a baseline to compare it to. And then over time, we'll either prove that this is the superior way of working, or we will find the reasons for why it isn't and what to improve. And that is a great way forward. And that is that is the purpose of this episode, to inspire you to persevere, to inspire you to seek, to ask for more, to aspire to a higher standard. Because otherwise you'll get this, we're swamped with support tickets and new features. So every meeting is about triaging. Are we doing maintenance? Are we doing support? Are we doing security updates? And, can you finish X so we can start on feature B ASAP? And again, the testing, this sort of hate for testing doesn't get resolved. Nobody sits down. And then, even if you just cram it down, even if I just do this and I say, only on our initiative we do this, everything else follows the old way, that is still a win, because it allows us to do this once, and then once you get some headspace, you get to do this, and then maybe the next project is going to look like this, right? And the key element here, yes, this is continuous integration and continuous delivery. I find it to be a helpful metaphor, but what's not visible in this diagram is that this kind of process validates features for value. It validates features for, we built 3 things, were they useful to the customer? Because if not, and we have 10 things in the backlog, it's quite possible we are wrong about the other 7. So as you get feedback on the first 3, it might prompt you to reorder or even to remove what it is you have planned for the future. That is the key point. That is where the acceleration comes from. Because what this team, the dysfunctional team, or team that has the culture of the dysfunctional culture, what they are not realizing is that most of their time is wasted because they're simply building the wrong product. They're focusing on the wrong areas. They're putting more effort into the wrong areas. They're over-engineering parts that the customers don't care about. They're under-engineering the parts that the customers are caring about. And they don't know which is which, because that can only happen during behavioral and sort of value testing with unit tests and deploying it and acting on the feedback immediately by adapting the acceptance tests and the unit tests before it goes into QA, before it goes into bug fix and maintenance. Once it goes there, it's too late. Once it goes into bug fix maintenance and end-to-end test QA checks that require like regression procedures, the potentially bad software was already written, and there's no undoing it. Okay. How to encourage these practices in a non-invasive way with your team. This is mostly for that scenario of I'm keeping myself to a high standard, but my other team is not writing any tests. This is a problem in leadership, right? So it is a problem that you see the value in it, your leader doesn't see the value in it, and the other team doesn't see the value in tests and doesn't see the value in testing for. They don't see the benefit in testing for customer value. So generally, what you can do is you can talk to your manager and look for ways, right? So you wanna apply the scientific method. So you wanna steel man their case, right? So, and this is a bit unintuitive, but you would essentially have to say, I'm writing tests. I'm spending a lot of time writing very good tests. I think it helps me accelerate. You're telling me I'm wasting my time and I could be developing more features. Let's assume you are right. If you are right, then X and Y and Z will happen. And then you'll put in place KPIs for X and Y and Z. And then if X and Y and Z are actually where they said it would be, then they are correct. Right? Usually this is something in the form of, if I'm wasting time writing tests, that means that the tests are never run, the tests will never find any bugs, and this team is slower than other teams who are writing tests. So again, taking into account the entire timeline, which means from their hypothesis, their team who is not writing tests provides a lot more value to the customer than you do. And you can ask them, okay, how do we know that's true? Right? And you inspire them to actually validate their on-test covered code for customer value. And once they start doing that, yeah, if they prove that you're not testing it, you can use their proof to write tests of that proof. But usually what actually happens is that when they check for value, in most cases, due to noise and like other stuff that's going on in the company, in my experience, when comparing the two teams, they are equal in productivity. Now, I know it's hard to measure productivity and that's probably silly, but usually if you then measure these two teams, they have the same level of output. This one has the same level of output as this one, which is a good thing, because then you have to ask yourself, hold on, if I'm spending less time building features and it's test covered, and it has the same level of output as writing features, why isn't everybody doing this? And then we get test coverage for free. And that's usually, that is like, for the last few teams and individuals that I helped coach, I think 70% of them had this realization of, at the worst, it's the same. So let's pick the option that has the tests over the option that doesn't have them. And that is the worst case scenario. Now, there is an outlier here. There is an outlier where somebody is such a perfectionist that they just spend all of their time learning everything that is about testing, and they're trying to fully test cover their entire legacy system, and their legacy system is like 200,000 lines of code. And then you have this like one perfectionist who just wants to test cover everything before they merge their first branch and have tests on production. And you'll notice that that behavior of doing this for too long is actually, spending way too much time on tests without getting feedback is equivalent to this. Right? So somebody who is just lock themselves away, they're factoring everything and they're test covering everything for 2 months without deploying anything new, that is the same kind of dysfunction as the team who doesn't do any tests. Right? So the team who just tests all the time and doesn't deploy any new features is just as dysfunctional as the team who deploys features all the time and never writes any tests. This is really important because a lot of teams, not a lot, but the teams that I stop coaching, what they do is they have a perfectionist who goes here, and then some manager or director comes in and sees this, and they say, what? This is the same. This is even worse now. Let's just go back to the way we did it before. And then it just drops motivation, and they kill the initiative. Okay, that's all 3 topics covered. I'm going to be online for 10 more minutes. And if you have any questions, now's the time. And I'll put up some background music to get you motivated. What should we put on? Rock. How's that? Question time. Short recap. A lot of lack of testing in teams is self-inflicted by engineers because they don't know better. They've never been on a high-performing team, so they don't know that their process is wasteful because they have no comparison frame. It's like you've always had an unhealthy sleeping habit and an unhealthy diet, and you don't know how bad it is because you've never been on a healthy one. Because it was always a product of your environment, not of your own decisions. So if you ask such a team, hey, do you want to write more tests? The engineers will probably say no, because they think they're in a state where they have to ask for permission and the actual tests have to be budgeted, because they feel like there's no freaking way that they would get away with building less features. What they're not aware of is that the features that they build at high volume are useless or wasteful at a very high percentage. Ryan says, thanks for the session. You're very welcome, Ryan. Thanks for showing up. We had a little bit of a break, so I expected a smaller audience today, but Ryan, Kalayan, great to have you today. The other part of the recap is when you find yourself in such a situation, the symptoms are generally that you spend way too much time triaging what to do next. Should we do support? Should we do maintenance? Should we upgrade something? Should we do security stuff? This is usually, the best way forward is to just admit, hey, why is it so hard to write tests for what it is that we're building? Why? Like, what prevents us from writing tests? Is it lack of knowledge? Is it lack of experience? Is it lack of confidence? Are we in an environment that requires like some special tooling? Just to take the time to actually introspect and to find answers to those questions rather than just being okay with being stuck. So that's the scoping issue. Don't push it to your team. If your team doesn't want to do it, it's probably because there's a lack of visibility. So if you're starting to do like unit testing, don't be the guy that just goes all in and just tries to refactor and rewrite the entire code base and then for everything. That's just as bad as not having any tests. So be the guy that just, take it bite-sized. Take a critical component and test cover it the next time you're making a change to it. And only test cover the change that you added. And then maybe it's going to be one less thing to end-to-end test cover and one less corner case to be worried about. And then over time, talk to your manager about how to highlight these improvements. And if nothing else, get the other team that tries to convince you to stop doing what you're doing to test what they're doing for value, and then compare it to what you're doing. And usually it will be like 50 and 50. You know, if you're tracking any kind of velocity or like weird performance metrics, usually these two teams will be equivalent. So then you can, or you'll be better if you have a lot of experience. Usually when I drop a very extreme programming TDD team into this kind of environment, they blow the other team out of the water. No question. That's one thing. If you're stuck and you feel like you're already doing overtime and you're burnt out and you're doing heroics, my recommendation would be do the heroic slightly smaller and much earlier into the project, and spend the heroic test covering the most critical functionality, which means do the critical functionality, like the critical domain functionality or the critical UI stuff, earlier in the project than you're comfortable, and test cover it, because you'll be exposing a little bit more time and budget risk earlier in the project. So if you're wrong, then you still have most of the project left to course correct. And if you are right, you will reap the benefits on a longer time scale. The worst thing you can do is to spend your entire budget, do a heroic towards the end of the project, and then when everybody's burnt out and you were late and the quality is not very good, then after the project is done, you spend a few hours writing a few tests. Because there is no time horizon in which you would benefit from the tests other than regression tests, and that you won't benefit anything from it. Either the bug is there or the bug is not there, and if somebody else breaks something in the future, well, they're also not test covering their new functionality, which they should to catch bugs in their functionality. And if they break something in your code, you don't even know whether what they broke is valuable to the customer at that later point in time in the future, because you never codified it, right? So that's the whole episode. Checking questions, no more questions. Thank you so much for being with me, and signing off. See you next week. Hopefully Adrian will be back. We're talking with a few guests regarding CTO related topics. It's Sander Hugendorf's girlfriend, partner that we're in talks with to get on the episode, to get her perspective as well on agile methodologies. We're talking with a few TDD experts on different kinds of tests that inspire you to get on this journey. This has been our tech journey. Subscribe if you want more. And see you soon. Have a lovely week. Have a lovely weekend if we don't talk. Subscribe on Crafting Tech Teams if you're interested, or follow me on LinkedIn. Talk soon. This was great. Ciao.